What is up, YouTube? This is your host Poison, and welcome to the channel of Cyber Attack Deconstructed. Today we are going to know NTLM attack in Active Directory. Ever wondered how can hackers break down or make collapse the whole company or enterprise? They basically do an Active Directory hack, and one of the main most attack is NTLM attack. First, let's know the basic. What is Active Directory? Active Directory is Microsoft's directory service that manages users, computer and resources in enterprises environment. It serves as the central authentication for hubs and for organizations where multiple endpoints, or known as employees, are connected with their computer sources to the main directory. Why it is critical? Active Directory controls access to virtually every resource in the network, whether it is files, whether it is server, or whether it is email service system. Compromising AD means Active Directory means controlling the entire enterprise's infrastructure. Now let's understand with a detailed diagram about Active Directory. So what is Active Directory and how the NTLM authentication workflow works? NTLM authentication workflow is divided into mainly two parts. The first part is where the client negotiates with the server or makes a connection with the server. Then server gives a challenge, or known as login panel or authentication panel, to the client. When client is able to give the valid username and password to the server, then his hashes or authentication details is then sent to the domain controller, which is Active Directory in this case. Once the Active Directory or the domain controllers cross-verifies the username and the password with its record, then it gives the verification notice to the server, and then the server lets client connect with the domain controller. Yep. Basically same workflow which I explained. When the clients make the authentication or give the authentication hashes to the server, server verifies with a domain controller, which is AD, Active Directory, cross-examines it, gives the response back to the server that yes, you can let him in. And when the server sends that notification to the client, then the client will be able to join to the domain controller. Understanding NTLM authentication. What is NTLM? NTLM is Anti-LAN Manager, which is a legacy authentication protocol used in Windows environment for verification using Credential. NTLM is just a authentication protocol which is used by enterprises to do the authentication with the server or with the domain controller. Where it is used, legacy application, older Windows system and some network services still rely on NTLM for authentication. Yes, still, and it is very critical and danger. Once we will get to the practical, we will explain it why. How it works. It uses challenge response mechanism, like I explained in the diagram. First, client negotiate with the server gives the challenge, client gives the hashes, then that hash is gone passed to the Active Directory, that is domain controller, and then the domain controller gives the access to the client. First, what is NTLM authentication handshake? It is basically a three-way handshake dance between client, server and domain controller, which is Active Directory. First, the client negotiate. Client sends initial request to the server indicating authentication capability. Clients negotiates, tell the server, hey, this is an employee trying to connect to the domain controller. Then server gives the challenge to the client that Server generates a random challenge or sends it to client. Please enter your username, password, and verify if you are not a robot or not. Third, when the client responds with encrypted challenge using user's password and hash, when the client gives proper username and password to the server, then the authentication is done. Why exactly NTLM is vulnerable? And still it is used in many of the enterprises. First, weak protocol design. It uses outdated cryptographic algorithms that are susceptible to modern cracking techniques. Cracking techniques? I don't think so. Hackers crack the techniques or crack the hashes. What do you think about? Please comment down below. Second, no mutual authentication. Server authenticates to client, but client doesn't verify server identity, enabling man in the middle. Server knows that you're talking. Server knows and gives the permission to the client to get in, but the client doesn't know whether we are talking to the server or the hacker. Third, relay possibilities. Attacker can intercept authentication attempts and relay them to other system without knowing the password. Yep, you heard that right. Cracking is no needed. Attacker just relay it to the hashes to the different machines, and they can get control over the other systems or the endpoints. Types of NTLM attack. First, NTLM relay attack. In this attack, intercept of authentication requests and forward them to target system to gain unauthorized access. Like attacker can do man in the middle, or just reading the messages transferred over the protocol, and then he can just push the hashes to the server through other machines like client. Next is pass the hash. Steal password hashes and reuse them to authenticate without knowing the actual password. Yes, you heard it right. Attackers can use man in the middle attack. Then they can steal your password hashes. They can then decode it and log in to the Active Directory using their own system. Third is NTLM brute force. They might brute force, or they might try to bash on the system by trying thousands of password combinations until finding one that produces matching hashes. Let's see and explain. Let us know what is NTLM relay attack. In this attack strategy or method, first, victim sends the auth request to the attacker. Yes, you heard it right. Victim doesn't know who is talking with, and server can authenticate only if you have the related hashes, that is password and username. First, victim sends auth request to the attacker. And then attacker just relay or just send it forward to the target server. Server is like, okay, that is the username and password we have in our record. Let's grant the access. And then the target server grants the access to the attacker. You heard it right and you read it right. No password cracking is required. This works because attacker authenticates without cracking anything. There's like, yeah, I'll grab his hashes, send it to the target server, and target server will be like, oh yeah, you can come in. Second and most important, man in the middle. This is the sub component of this one. Man in the middle. When a victim and a server, victim is also known as you can say, employee. You heard it right. When a victim and server are talking with each other, attacker intercepts or goes between them or just hijack their communication and then reads all their communication. This will help them to gain the things which will help them in the next attack, that is hashes. In the next and lastmost attack is pass the hash. Attacker then sends those hashes or use those hashes to crack the username and password and then logins to the server. What happens if an attacker logins into the server of enterprise? Yeah, you heard it right. He will own the enterprise. Let's go or deep dive into the NTLM relay attack. How attacker intercept authentication, you might ask. Yeah, attacker position themselves between client and server, capturing authentication requests and forwarding them to the vulnerable target. The attacker never needs to crack the password, just relay the encrypted response. Yes, just take it, push it, no cracking. So in the practical session, we are going to use some tools, or most of the three main tools, to do this lab process. First is a responder. Responder is a script which spoofs services to capture authentications. Second is NTLM relays. It is an impacted tool script that relays NTLM authentication. And third is far most dangerous you can think, that is man-in-the-middle 6. It is a tool that forces client to use attacker-controlled DNS. First, there are 4 things that help an attacker to gain an access to the Active Directory or the AD. First is spoof service. Then the victim sends his hashes. He captures, or attacker captures, the NTLM hashes, relay it and gain the password. Now you know what the Active Directory is. What are the attack strategies or methods? Now let's move on to the lab setup for your practical session. You have to get 3 disks, which are, one is Windows 9 or Windows 10 2019 enterprises level. Second is Windows Server ISO disk, and third is Kali Linux, which will help us to imitate as an attacker. Lab attack scenario. Attacker machine, which is Kali Linux, help us to run responder and NTLM relays to capture and relay authentication. Second, which is Windows 10 Enterprise ISO 𝗲𝗁, which help us to user or us. In this case, we will try to attack as an attacker, act as an attacker, and also as a victim, and also in some cases as a domain controller. Victim machine. User authenticates, unknowingly sending credentials to the attacker. Third, domain controller accepts relayed authentication, granting attacker access as victim. Disclaimer: important. This demonstration uses isolated lab environments. Never perform these attacks on production system without proper authentication. Yes, you heard it right, you read it right. It is illegal to perform an attack or hacking without any well-written permission. You might face legal charges for it. How can this impact? How can this attack? How can this method? How can this strategy? How can this whole NTLM thing, that is anti-LAN module, can impact and still impacting in the real world. First, privilege escalation. Gain administrator rights across multiple systems by relaying authentication from root privileged account. Only one system hijacking is required for an attacker to gain the whole enterprise's access. Second, lateral movement. Then attacker tries to hijack multiple systems simultaneously so that the cybersecurity or SOC team cannot be able to reverse that attack or to remove or to push out attacker or hacker from their enterprise. Third is data breach risk. Access sensitive files, databases and intellectual property across compromised system. Yes, hackers can sell your data. Now you understood what is NTLM, what is Active Directory, what are the methods, what are the tools we are going to use, and yes, we are going to see the actual representation of the attack and defense. Detection and mitigation strategies. How can you detect whether you are getting hacked or whether you are hacked or not? And mitigation. What are the remedies or what are the strategies or what are the protection measures you should follow? Detection techniques. First, monitor authentication logs. Always try to check authentication logs. Where is the authentication hashes is coming from? Where is the connection is coming from? Second, track event IDs, whether it is coming from Windows or whether it is coming from Linux. Every Linux has an event ID, every Windows has an event ID, but both those tools have different types of event IDs. Third, network anomalies. Check if you have an unknown source or unknown person in your network, enterprise's network. Protection measures. Disable it. Yes, disable NTLM. Why? It is not secure. Anybody can read, as we learned, anybody can read our hashes and log in into our Active Directory or domain controller. Second, enforce SMB signing. Third, use 𝗬𝗏. Fourth, network segmentation. The tools used by attackers, and yes, these three are the real world tools used by the attacker. Responder, multifunctional tool that implements that server message block, SMB. Web server, HTTP, HTTPS and other protocols to capture authentication. In-package suite, collection of Python classes for working with network protocol, including NTLM Relay X for relay attacks and other penetration testing tool. Mimikatz, post-exploitation tool that extract plain text password, hash, pin codes and heuristic from your memory. Key takeaways. The things we learned from this video is first, NTLM remains dangerous. Yes, even though multiple of the enterprises uses those services, uses those protocol, it is still dangerous. Second, detection is challenging. Yes, because of the man in the middle attack, it is impossible to detect when and from where attack is going to happen. Third, relay attacks bypass defense. If a firewall, before getting to the server, if a firewall sees, yeah, I am getting a connection from this system and I have the permission to grant them access, so attacker can bypass the firewall. Yes, and mitigation requires planning. Every mitigation solution or every protection measures requires a proper planning. I hope you heard what is NTLM, what is Active Directory, what is our lab setup, what are the attack method strategies, what are the tools, what are the detection and mitigation strategies, and key takeaways. Let's move on to the lab section.